Hi, my name is Blythe, and I never thought a homemade photo album would be the last gift I ever gave my mother. The room smelled like lemon-glazed chicken and expectations. It was a birthday dinner, not mine, of course. It was Mom's 60th, the kind of milestone people make speeches at. But there was no warm toast planned for me. There never was. I wasn't the golden child. I was the shadow. The dining room shimmered with crystal wine glasses, laughter, and the sort of polished tension you only get when everyone's pretending things are fine. The long mahogany table was crowded with family, Aunt Marcia in her Chanel knockoff, Cousin Devon scrolling through his phone, and across from me, my sister Ivy, glowing in a champagne silk dress, her diamond bracelet catching every drop of light like it was doing it on purpose. Ivy handed Mom a sleek little envelope. "Open it!" she grinned. Mom pulled out the card, and inside was a certificate for a luxury spa weekend. Everyone clapped. Dad smiled proudly. "That's my girl," he said. Then it was my turn. I slid a square gift box across the table. Inside, wrapped in simple cream paper, was a handmade photo album. Every memory I could salvage from dusty shoeboxes and forgotten USB drives. Me, Ivy, and Mom at the park. Mom asleep on the couch, mid-snore. A Polaroid of the four of us at a beach before things fell apart. I even included handwritten notes, one behind each picture. "This is quaint," Mom said, barely looking at the cover. "Did you make this yourself?" I nodded. "I thought maybe we could remember the good stuff before—" She cut me off with a laugh so short it could have been a cough. "Blythe, I needed a break, not a scrapbook of your little therapy project." My stomach dropped. The silence was loud. A few cousins shifted awkwardly. I caught Devon glancing up from his phone. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, like he was getting ready to deliver news nobody wanted. "You always make everything about yourself," he said. "What?" I blinked. "You show up empty-handed, no real gift, no class, and you expect applause for a bunch of old pictures?" I stared at him. The insult wasn't the surprise. It was how natural it came to him, like breathing. "I spent weeks making that," I said, my voice a thread. "It's not about the money." "That's exactly what poor people say," Ivy muttered into her champagne. I turned to her. "Excuse me?" "Ivy!" her fiancé mumbled beside her, eyes darting. "No," Ivy snapped. "I'm tired of pretending she belongs at the table. Mom and Dad carried you long enough, Blythe. What do you even do now? Work part-time at that sad bookstore? No savings, no degree. You're a leech." Everyone froze. It was so quiet, I could hear the whir of the ceiling fan. Dad stood up. I thought maybe he'd say that was too far. But instead, he pointed at me. "You're ungrateful. You've always been ungrateful. We sacrificed everything for you, and you turned out to be nothing. Get out." "Dad." I said get out, and never come back. It took a second, maybe two. Then I stood. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the small black device clipped under my collar, and pressed stop. "What the hell is that?" Dad asked. "A recorder," I said quietly. "Don't worry, it's already uploaded to the cloud." "What? Why? Are you threatening us?" Mom snapped. "No, I'm making sure I remember." I turned to Ivy. "One day, you'll wish you had someone who tried this hard." Then I picked up the album, tucked it under my arm, and walked to the door. No one followed. No one called after me. But I'll never forget the sound of my mother's voice behind me, brittle and sharp. "Drama queen." And I'll never forget my own voice replying, right before the door closed behind me. "No, just done." I didn't go home that night. Not to the apartment I rented over the old florist shop downtown, where my neighbor smoked cloves through the vent and the water ran brown every other Tuesday. I didn't go anywhere. I just walked. Down Pinewood, past where the pavement cracks in webs, like the neighborhood's trying to shake off its skin. past the little brick library, with its flickering lamplight and free tax help sign duct taped to the door, past the pharmacy, where they still knew me as Ivy's sister. Funny how even strangers knew I wasn't the main character. Eventually, I found myself back at the park near our old school, the same one where Ivy once pushed me off the monkey bars, and Mom laughed because, siblings roughhouse, that's normal. I sat on a cold metal bench under the flickering glow of a dying lamp and finally let my hands shake. I still had the photo album, the stupid, heartbreaking photo album. It was torn now, bent from where I'd pressed it to my chest like armor, while Dad, my own father, shouted me out of his house like a trespasser. Ungrateful, he said. He always said that word like it was a diagnosis, as if all his parenting amounted to some emotional invoice I had failed to pay. I sat there long enough for the sky to fade from navy to steel. Cars passed. People went on with their lives. Nobody saw me. Nobody asked. That was the worst part. Not the cold. Not the silence. The invisibility. I walked back to my place sometime before dawn, legs stiff, head hollow. I didn't cry. I just moved, like one of those wind-up toys that doesn't know it's already broken. When I stepped inside my apartment, the first thing I saw was the wall, covered top to bottom with sticky notes and torn journal scraps. Memories, fragments, moments. My therapist once told me, writing gives chaos a shape. So I gave it one. Yellow and crooked and loud. Locked outside, December age 7. Cranberry juice incident, Ivy lied. Bike for her, nothing for me. She said, "You're not normal, Blythe." They said, "Maybe you shouldn't write. It makes you weird." That last one always stung. Not because they said it, but because I believed it. I sank into my futon, still in the same clothes from dinner. The smell of garlic from Mom's roast chicken clung to me like shame. My phone buzzed. Aunt Marcia. "Call me. Your parents are devastated." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a folder on my laptop I hadn't touched in years. Audio files. See, when I was in therapy during college, I started recording conversations. At first, it was just sessions, things to play back when the noise in my head got too loud. But then, I started recording at home. Quietly. Casually. As if part of me already knew no one would believe me unless they heard it themselves. I clicked on one titled, Thanksgiving 2018, Kitchen Argument. Mom's voice poured through the speakers, bitter and clipped. "Ivy brings home A's, and you bring home poetry. We didn't raise you for fairy tales, Blythe." Dad. "You're too sensitive. Always have been." And then me. Small, brittle, trying to be brave. "I just want you to be proud of me." "Then be someone worth being proud of," Mom replied. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear. From fury. That night, I dreamt of the house again. Same hallways, same pictures. Only this time, they were all of Ivy. Every wall, every frame. Even the mirrors reflected her face. When I looked down at my own hands in the dream, they were disappearing. I woke up and knew what I had to do. I took the bus. Back to the neighborhood. Back to the house that had rejected me. Not to fight, to remember, to retrieve what they buried. The house looked just like it always had. Trim hedges, stone walkway, that ridiculous live, laugh, love sign in the entryway. I still had a key on my old lanyard. They never asked for it back. Probably didn't even remember. Inside, it smelled like furniture polish and old grievances. I walked past the living room, past the mantel lined with Ivy's trophies. Debate, ballet, volunteer of the year, nothing of mine. In the hallway closet, beneath a pile of holiday decorations, I found it. The old gray fireproof box. The one Mom always said was just for taxes and health records. I knew the code. It hadn't changed since I was 10. Their anniversary. Inside were folders, legal forms, receipts, letters. I pulled out a manila envelope labeled Medical, 1995. Inside, stapled to my birth certificate, was a hospital intake form, and written in blue ink, under patient notes, were the words that would split something inside me permanently. Patient expresses emotional distress about unintended pregnancy. States, I don't feel anything for this baby. I only stayed pregnant because my husband threatened to leave. My mother hadn't just been overwhelmed. She hadn't wanted me at all. And she kept it. Buried, laminated, filed away like old taxes. There was more. A letter, handwritten, to her own mother, my grandmother, who died before I was born. I don't know what to do with Blythe. She doesn't fit. She's too sensitive, too slow, too much. Ivy's the kind of daughter you write about. Blythe's the one you endure. I read that line 4 times. Then again. Then again. And something inside me broke. Not in a bad way. Not the I'll never recover way. More like when you finally pop your shoulder back into place after years of pretending it didn't hurt. I left the box the way I found it. Took nothing. The damage was already done. But now it had a shape. Back at my apartment, I opened a new document, titled it, The Daughter You Endure. I started typing. Not for them. For me. The first time my mother ever taught me silence was a punishment. I was 5. She stood over me in the kitchen after I asked why Ivy got the last cookie. Because Ivy earned it, she said. I said I'd cleaned the living room. She didn't answer, not then. Not for the rest of that day, not one word. That was the day I learned you could starve someone without ever skipping a meal. Now I was learning a different kind of silence. The strategic kind. The kind that doesn't retreat, but repositions. I'd spent 2 days rereading the letter I found in the lockbox. The words were branded into my memory. She doesn't fit. She's too much. Ivy's the daughter you write about. For a while, I thought I'd burn it. That would have been poetic. But then I thought, why should I destroy the only evidence that proves I wasn't crazy? So instead, I did something I never thought I would. I made copies, scanned, backed up. Cloud and encrypted folder. 2 USBs. One hidden in a book on my shelf. One mailed to a P.O. box I'd opened in another city under a fake name. Not paranoia. Just pattern recognition. That weekend, I texted Ava. Ava was my old college roommate, the kind of person who didn't blink when I confessed I sometimes recorded my family just in case. She used to joke, "You're like the FBI, but sadder." Me. Still have that audio clip from Thanksgiving 2018? Ava. The one with your mom calling you emotionally defective? Me. That one. She sent it within 10 minutes. I listened to it in the dark. Mom's voice was crisp, like she was proud of every syllable. She's always had something wrong, crying all the time, writing that depressing crap. Honestly, I think there's a chemical imbalance. Dad. Maybe she'll grow out of it. Mom. Or into it. Either way, not my problem once she moves out. Click. I sat back, felt the familiar ache behind my eyes. And then I smiled. Not out of joy, but clarity. If I ever wanted to be heard, I had to build the room myself. That week, I began planning what I called the quiet avalanche. Not revenge, not directly, but exposure. Slow, deliberate, undeniable. The kind of truth that doesn't knock. It seeps. I started by contacting Mrs. Kellerman, my old high school English teacher. She had been one of the only adults to ever ask if things were okay at home. We met at a coffee shop on the east side. She ordered a black coffee and held it like it was a shield. "You look older," she said, eyeing the fatigue around my face. "But you've always carried a bit more weight than people saw." "I need a favor," I said. She nodded. Didn't ask what it was. I told her about the letter, the recordings, the Thanksgiving clip. I told her I was thinking about putting it all together. Not to shame anyone, but to validate people like me who spent years thinking maybe the coldness was their fault. She listened, carefully, then said something I didn't expect. "You know, people will hate you for this." I looked at her. "For telling the truth?" She sipped her coffee. "No, for making them realize it might be theirs too." I left that meeting with something more than support, I left with a strategy. Step 1. Create distance. I turned off location sharing on every app, changed passwords, removed Ivy and Mom from my digital trail. Step 2. Secure narrative. I wrote a 2,000-word essay titled The Daughter They Erased, under a pseudonym. Submitted it to a trauma storytelling blog. It got picked up within 48 hours. Step 3. Prepare evidence every file, every voice memo, every letter. I labeled, categorized, and narrated them, added context, clarified timelines. Step 4. Untraceable distribution. Instead of blasting it on social media, I created a Dropbox with limited time links and sent it anonymously to family members, including Aunt Marcia and my cousin Theo, who was a podcast editor in Denver. 3 days later, Ivy called me. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "Ivy, what the hell is this? Marcia just sent me a link to a folder with our mom's letters in it. Are you mentally unstable?" "Ivy, call me back, now." I didn't, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't their problem to solve. I was their reckoning. That night, I took a walk to clear my head. It was raining, not hard, but enough to soak the collar of my coat and make the city lights look like melted crayons. I stopped in front of a bookstore. The sign in the window read, "Open Mic Night, Stories That Heal." I don't know what made me go inside. Maybe I needed proof that stories mattered. Maybe I wanted to hear someone else speak and not flinch. Inside, a woman was telling a story about how her father used to punish her by removing light bulbs from her room so she'd sit in her darkness. The audience was silent, not from boredom, from recognition. When she finished, people clapped. But more than that, they nodded. And that was when I realized something no therapy session had ever fully given me. I wasn't alone. Not in the way that used to feel like a punishment. In the way that meant we existed. Survivors of polite cruelty, of generational theater. And I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's script. I was writing my own. Ivy's wedding invitation came wrapped in silence. No phone call, no awkward apology, no truce. Just a beige envelope slid under my apartment door like a jury summons. My name was spelled right. That was new. Inside, a stiff card with golden embossed lettering announced the time, place, and promise of perfection. Ivy and Mason, June 17th. St. Rose Cathedral, reception to follow at the Pines Country Club. No personal note, no RSVP deadline, just 2 names in cursive and a single line at the bottom that read, "Dress code, formal, family unity is expected." Family unity. I laughed when I read it. That sharp, involuntary kind of laugh that sounds more like a cough. The kind that escapes when your body doesn't quite know if it's supposed to feel offended or amused. I let the envelope sit on my counter for days, unopened, but somehow still loud. Every time I walked past it, something in me flinched, as if the cardstock might explode. Eventually, I slid it into a drawer under old receipts and forgotten charger cables, but it stayed in my head. I kept hearing my mother's voice at the birthday dinner weeks earlier. "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." And yet here they were, inviting me back. Not for healing, not for truth, just for optics. Because to Ivy, and to my parents, nothing was sacred. Not even vows, not even appearances. Especially not appearances. I didn't reply, but I began preparing. Not for revenge. I didn't want to ruin her wedding. I wanted to free myself from the last thread of silence that still connected me to their performance. The day arrived with the kind of heat that clings to your neck and seeps into your bones. I wore a midnight blue dress. Simple, elegant, but sharp at the seams. I let my hair down and wore the necklace I bought myself the year I graduated, alone. It wasn't about how I looked. It was about how I felt walking in, whole. The cathedral was exactly what Ivy would have picked. Tall ceilings, gold trim, a string quartet playing Adele covers like they were Mozart. Guests murmured in pastel whispers. I slipped into a back pew and stayed quiet. No one noticed me. Not at first. But then Aunt Marcia turned around. Her eyebrows rose. She whispered something to my cousin. They looked back again. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I let them stew in confusion. I belonged there more than most of them, because I knew what Ivy looked like without the veil. The ceremony itself was exactly what you'd expect. Ivy floated down the aisle with that rehearsed elegance she always used at dance recitals. Mason stood waiting with a soft smile, one I wasn't sure was real. The priest spoke of love, patience, sacrifice, words that echoed off the cathedral walls, but never quite reached anyone's hearts. When Ivy said, "I do," she glanced sideways at the crowd. Not at Mason, at us, at me, like she needed to be sure we were all watching. It was never about him. It was always about the stage. The reception was held in a mansion so pristine, it felt like walking through a showroom. White roses, candlelight, orchestral covers of every top 40 love song in existence. The waitstaff moved like synchronized swimmers. Ivy had spared no expense, because in her world, love could be constructed if you had enough money and matching linens. I didn't sit at a table. I wasn't assigned one. But I lingered, watched, listened, until the DJ stepped forward and tapped the mic. "We now welcome the bride's sister, Blythe, for a few words." My heart stopped. Ivy's smile faltered. Just for a second. Just enough. I walked to the stage. The mic felt cold in my hand. My throat wasn't dry. It was ready. "I wasn't scheduled to speak today," I said, voice steady. "But I've been part of this family for a long time. Long enough to know that what isn't said often matters more than what is." A pause. "The truth is, I spent most of my life believing love was something you earned by being quiet. By folding yourself smaller and smaller until you fit into the shape someone else made for you." I looked directly at Ivy. "But love isn't performance, and family isn't control." A few murmurs. Forks paused midair. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the letter. "This is a note my mother wrote about me. Not to me, about me. Found it in a locked box, alongside records that documented how she tried to deny my existence before I was born, and how, even after I arrived, she never fully accepted that I was here." I read it, word for word, no drama, no trembling, just truth. Ivy didn't move. My father stared at the tablecloth. My mother's hand was clenched around her wineglass. "And I'm not sharing this because I want pity," I continued. "I'm sharing it because too many people pretend, and too many others are forced to swallow silence for the sake of illusion." Someone in the back coughed. Someone else stood. I turned to Mason. "This is who you're marrying into," I said, voice calm but unflinching. "Maybe you already knew. Maybe you didn't. But now you do." And I stepped down. There was no applause, just a thick, electric silence. I didn't wait to be escorted out. I walked through the garden, past fairy lights and clinking champagne flutes, and exited the venue with my head high. Halfway to the parking lot, I heard footsteps. "Mason," I said without turning. He slowed. "You knew I'd follow?" "No," I said, "but I hoped someone would." He looked pale, conflicted. "Ivy never told me any of that. She said you were dramatic, that you were jealous." I looked at him, really looked. "And you believed her?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "I didn't know what to believe," he admitted. I handed him a flash drive. "You don't have to take my word. There's context, letters, audio, a full picture." He didn't take it, not yet. "She loves me," he said, quietly, almost to himself. I nodded. "Maybe she does. But people can love you and still need you to validate their version of the world. Be careful what kind of truth you're agreeing to live with." And then, finally, he took the flash drive. No goodbye, just a heavy silence. But not the kind that hurts, the kind that ends things. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by candles and takeout. I poured a glass of wine and wrote in my journal for 2 hours. Not about them. About me. About how, for the first time in my life, I said everything that needed to be said, not for impact, but for integrity. I had nothing left to prove, and that, more than anything, felt like peace. The morning after the wedding felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Too still. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you wonder whether something is wrong, or whether the world is simply holding its breath. I didn't wake up feeling victorious. There was no cinematic montage of me dancing in my kitchen, no inspirational music swelling in the background. I got up, poured cold coffee from the night before, and sat on the floor by the window with a blanket wrapped around my legs. My phone had 22 missed calls, mostly from blocked or unknown numbers. A few from Ivy, 2 from Aunt Marcia, none from my parents. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I watched the street come alive outside my window. A kid on a scooter almost ran into a trash can. A man in a suit cursed when his coffee spilled on his shirt. 2 women laughed about something only they understood. The world, as always, moved on. But mine was changing. Not in grand, explosive ways, but in the tiniest, most permanent shifts. And I could feel them taking root. I checked my email. The trauma blog that had published my anonymous essay had sent a follow-up. Hi, Ames. We've had over 2,300 comments and shares on your story. Would you be interested in doing a virtual reading for our next healing event? We can keep your identity private if you'd prefer. Let us know. Warmly, Dana. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. Something about seeing that number, 2,000, made my hands tremble. I wasn't alone. I had known that intellectually. But now I had proof. There were thousands of people who read my story and saw themselves in it. People like me. People who'd been told to sit down, shut up, and smile while their souls were slowly starved. I typed a reply before I could overthink it. Yes. I'd like to speak. Thank you for seeing me. Blythe. Then I hit send. It was the first time I'd used my real name on a platform I didn't control, and it felt like breathing after years underwater. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on my door, sharp, impatient. I knew before I opened it. Ivy. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were bloodshot. Her hands trembled, even as she tried to steady her breath. You, she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. You couldn't just let me have it, could you? I closed the door behind her and leaned against it. Let you have what? I asked. Your wedding? Your perfect lie? She spun around, her voice cracking. It wasn't a lie. I said nothing. I earned everything I have, she snapped. I worked hard to build something normal, something that wasn't broken and bitter and what? I asked. Did you ever stop to think that maybe I wasn't broken until I was forced to live in a house that worshipped you and punished me? Her shoulders slumped. I never asked to be worshipped, she said quietly. But you never rejected it either, I replied. We stood in silence, breathing in the sharp edge of truth. Finally, Ivy said, Mason hasn't called me since the reception. I'm not surprised, I said. He seemed like someone who actually listens. She winced. I loved him, she whispered. I believe you, I said. But sometimes love isn't enough when it's built on silence. She sat down on the arm of my couch, not asking, just collapsing. Her voice was quieter now. I didn't know Mom wrote that letter. She wrote worse, I said. You just never had to find out. Because she never had to hide it from you. Ivy looked at me, her eyes raw. Why didn't you ever tell me? I hesitated. I did. You just never listened. We sat for a long time without speaking. The kind of silence that didn't feel like punishment, but space. Eventually, she stood. I guess we're both tired, she said. Yeah. At the door, she paused, looked back. I don't know if I can fix anything. You can start by not pretending, I said. That's something. Then she left. No hug, no apology, but also no lie. That was new. Later that evening, I got a call. I answered before checking the ID. It was Mason. Hi, he said. Hi. I listened, he said. To everything. And? And I didn't sleep last night. I waited. I keep thinking about the way Ivy looked when you read that letter. It was like she finally realized you existed. I've always existed, I said. I know, he replied. I just wish I'd met you first. There was a pause. Heavy, but not uncomfortable. I'm not calling to chase anything, he added quickly. I just needed to say I'm sorry. For what? For believing what was easier. That landed like something solid in my chest. Thank you, I said. I mean that. I hope you keep writing, he said. You're not just telling your story, you're telling ours too. When the call ended, I sat in the dark again. But this time, the darkness didn't feel like punishment. It felt like potential. A soft place to begin something new. That weekend, I agreed to the virtual reading. I sat at my desk, laptop open, ring light glowing like a soft halo. The Zoom room filled slowly. People from all over, names I didn't know, faces that looked like mine. Tired, brave, quietly fierce. When it was my turn, I read my piece aloud. My voice shook only once. At the end, someone in the chat typed, "You just told my life." Then another, "I thought I was the only one." And one more, "I never knew what it was until now." I closed the laptop and wept. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I knew that breaking didn't mean ending. It meant blooming. It meant beginning. And I wasn't alone anymore. Not even close. 3 months later, I stood in a city where no one knew my name. No one called me Ivy's sister. No one glanced at me and saw a cautionary tale. In this city, I was just a woman signing a lease on a 2-room apartment with creaky hardwood floors and too much light. The place smelled like new paint and old wood. There was a chipped radiator in the corner that hissed like it had secrets. It was perfect. I didn't tell anyone I was moving. No announcement, no Instagram story. I just packed 2 suitcases, left the keys to my old apartment in a stamped envelope, and disappeared from the version of myself that had survived too long. The moving truck was late, so I sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, watching the shadows crawl across the room. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I was simply present. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I unpacked my books first. I built shelves, bought cheap fairy lights, and a dusty armchair from Facebook Marketplace. Hung 2 pictures, one of a typewriter, one of a mountain trail. No photos of family, just potential. The city breathed differently. Everyone moved with a kind of silent purpose. Coffee shops buzzed with ambition. People wore headphones, kept to themselves, but never looked away too quickly. I liked that. I liked the anonymity. It gave me space to rebuild, not just recover. I found a part-time job at a secondhand bookstore on the corner of Vine and Prospect. The owner, a woman named Elise, wore oversized glasses and always smelled like mint tea. "You write?" she asked one day as I sorted through a box of donated novels. I paused. "Used to," she shrugged. "Writers never really stop. They just go quiet." That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor for 22 minutes before I typed a single sentence. I'm not a ghost. It felt indulgent. Then necessary. Then true. The blog that published my first piece reached out again. They offered a recurring column, said my voice had sparked something. "We've had dozens of readers ask for more, especially about your recovery," Dana wrote, "how you rebuilt, what you held on to, what you let go." At first, I wasn't sure. I wasn't a therapist. I didn't have answers. But maybe that was the point. So I wrote a piece titled "Things I Didn't Say at the Table." I talked about forgiveness as a personal decision, not a family reunion. About healing without reconciliation. About how choosing yourself is not an act of rebellion, but survival. The piece went viral. I didn't read the comments, but Dana sent me a few. "Your words gave me permission." I thought I had to wait for them to say sorry. I can breathe now. I didn't cry when I read them. I smiled. Not the performative kind, The quiet kind, the one that starts deep and rises slowly. One afternoon, Elise handed me a package. "No return address," she said. "Just your name." Inside was a letter. Not from Ivy. Not from Mason. From my mother. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Slanted, elegant, unshaken. "Blythe, I've been told it's too late to write. That too much has been said. But I needed to say one thing. I read your words. I didn't recognize myself in them. And that terrified me. Because if they're true, I owe you more than I can ever repay. But if they're not, why do they still echo in my mind? You don't have to respond. I just needed you to know I read every word. Twice. Mom." I reread it 4 times. Not because it changed anything, but because it didn't try to. There was no apology, no denial, no promise, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's enough. I didn't write back. Instead, I placed the letter in a drawer, beneath the essays and drafts and notebooks that now filled my desk. I pressed my fingers to the top and whispered, "I'm still choosing me." Later that month, I stood in front of a class of strangers. A university had invited me to guest speak in a creative writing course focused on personal narrative. The professor had found my blog, said the students were craving voices that didn't feel curated or commercial. The room was full of faces too young to know how much their voice would matter later. I told them about silence. I told them about letters no one intended you to find, about speaking, not to be heard, but to survive. A girl in the back raised her hand. "How did you forgive them?" I paused. "I didn't," I said, "but I forgave myself for waiting so long to try." That night, I wrote another piece. Not for the blog, for me. It was called "The First Time I Believed Myself," and I realized something I hadn't dared to name. I was proud, not of the trauma, but of the person I'd become because I stopped pretending I wasn't hurt. By the time fall settled into the bones of the city, my apartment smelled like eucalyptus and pages. The trees outside my window had turned amber and burnt orange, and the wind carried that soft, decisive chill that made people pull their coats tighter and walk a little faster. I walked slower now. There was no rush in healing. I had learned that. It didn't arrive like a package. It grew, crooked and soft, with roots you couldn't always see. And somehow, amidst the quiet, I had become someone people wanted to hear from. The trauma blog had turned into a full column. Twice a month, I submitted essays that ranged from reflective to raw, and the readership had grown beyond anything I imagined. Thousands read. Hundreds wrote back. Some shared stories that mirrored mine. Others admitted they hadn't even realized how much they'd normalized the pain until they saw it on a screen, written by someone who looked nothing like them, but felt everything like them. Dana emailed me one afternoon. "We want to do something more," she wrote. "A live event, in person, panels, workshops, a space for survivors to connect. We'd love for you to open it." I sat with the offer for days. Not because I didn't want to, because I did. But speaking in front of strangers was one thing. Speaking in front of survivors, people who had dragged themselves out of burning houses, some still smoking, felt sacred. I didn't want to get it wrong. But then I remembered the first time I'd heard someone say, "I didn't know there was a name for this." That was what changed me. So I said yes. The event was held in a repurposed church turned community center. High ceilings, exposed beams, a mix of folding chairs and worn couches. Nothing glossy, everything real. I arrived early. The volunteer coordinator, Jasmine, greeted me with the kind of hug that only women who've survived know how to give. Not too tight, just firm enough to say, "You're safe here." "There's a green room if you need space," she said. "No pressure to stay the whole time. We've got counselors on site. Water's by the window. Snacks are vegan and nut-free. You're not alone." I almost cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything in that room had been built by people who had once been crushed by silence, and they'd chosen to fill the space with softness instead of bitterness. When it was my turn to speak, I stood behind a microphone on a makeshift stage. The room was warm with bodies and breath, and stories not yet spoken. I didn't have a script, just notes. I looked out at the crowd and said, "There are 100 ways to be wounded, but very few ways to be believed. Most of us spent years trying to explain pain that had no bruises." Heads nodded. A few people closed their eyes. I continued. "I thought I was the only one who grew up in a house where silence was love, and speaking up was betrayal." A woman in the second row exhaled audibly. "I thought if I just behaved better, gave more, stayed smaller, they'd see me." I paused. "But what I've learned is that shrinking doesn't earn love. It just makes you easier to ignore." The room didn't clap. They didn't need to. Their stillness was louder than applause. After the talk, people lined up. Not for pictures, but for moments. They handed me folded notes, shared single sentences. Some cried, some laughed. One man whispered, "I didn't think men like me were allowed to feel this way." Another gave me a bracelet and said, "This is from my daughter. You reminded her she's allowed to have boundaries." I wore it home. Back in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror, the bracelet loose around my wrist. It was made of simple cord and 3 wooden beads. Nothing fancy. But it felt like armor. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Dad. I heard you were speaking about us. I don't know what to say. Your mother is still upset. I just want peace." I stared at it for a long time. Peace. What he wanted was quiet. What he wanted was for me to stop being inconvenient. I didn't reply. But I saved the text, because even silence deserves to be documented. Later that week, Dana called. "I've got someone who wants to connect with you," she said. "She runs a foundation that funds trauma recovery projects. She read your essay about choosing yourself." I agreed to meet her. Her name was Soraya. She wore black boots and a denim jacket, and had the kind of gaze that looked like it had seen war, but still believed in rebuilding. We met at a cafe on a Thursday afternoon. "I don't want to take your story," she said immediately. "I want to amplify it. Whatever form you want." I didn't flinch. "What do you have in mind?" "A podcast. Your voice. Stories like yours. Not the sensationalized version, the real ones. We'll fund it. Studio time, production, distribution. You just bring the truth." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Only if I have full creative control. I won't package pain for clickbait." She nodded. "You'll have it." The first episode was called "The Last Time I Said Nothing." It opened with a memory. A quiet Sunday. Me, Ivy, a spilled cup. My mother's voice calling me dramatic. The sound of the front door clicking shut as I was left outside for hours. Then I said, "Silence was the first language I learned, but I'm unlearning it now." The inbox flooded. People wrote from shelters, from bedrooms, from prison cells, from offices. Some were mothers who had done the harm and were trying to do better. Others were daughters still in it. And some were people like me, on the edge of freedom, scared, hopeful, angry, exhausted, alive. One night, I got an email from Ivy. Subject line, "I listened." Message, "I don't know who I was trying to protect. Maybe myself. Maybe the idea of our family. I'm not writing to fix anything. I just wanted to say, I finally heard you. And I'm sorry." I didn't reply, but I printed it, framed it, not as a trophy, as a record. Not all grief ends in reconciliation, but sometimes it ends in recognition, and that's a start. The last podcast episode streamed to thousands, but I recorded it alone in my apartment, barefoot, the heater clanking beside me. "I used to think surviving was the end goal," I said into the mic. "But it's only the beginning. You rebuild, you rise, you repeat." That night, the inbox filled with messages from strangers who now felt like kin. A girl wrote, "You gave me language for pain I thought was mine alone." I stared at the blinking cursor and realized, this voice, mine, isn't shaking anymore. Weeks later, at a storytelling event in the city, I saw Ivy in the front row. Her presence was calm, unforced. Afterwards, she approached. "I heard everything," she said, "not just with my ears. This time, with my heart." I didn't reply right away. Then quietly, "That's all I ever wanted." We stood there for a moment, not as enemies, not quite sisters, but maybe something new. When Soraya offered to feature my story in the National Podcast magazine, I said yes. The headline read, "Breaking Silence, Building Self." At home, I placed the issue beside the first essay I ever wrote. I didn't cry. I smiled. Later, I was invited to speak at the National Trauma and Writing Conference. My keynote ended with this: "If no one ever told you you're enough, let me be the first. And if you're still standing, type 1. That's more than enough to start." I've learned that sometimes the closure we seek doesn't come in apologies. It comes in reclaiming our voice. Choosing peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer waiting for someone else's version of healing. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable and started living for the version of me that always deserved more. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away just to finally feel seen? If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, or just drop a 1 to say you're here. And hey, if you didn't connect with it, I'd love to hear why too. If you found value here, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Your voice matters, and this is a space for it.